Mikey had a point about how he thinks that Trump will not spend a day in prison. Go ahead and tell us, Jersey Mike.
All right, thanks for having me on, Red. So yeah, I don't believe Trump is actually going to spend a day in jail. I think the whole point of this political trial was to convict him so Biden could label him as a convicted felon during the general election. Because face it right now, Biden is failing in the polls. Are blue states that are now down to single digits, New York on average, and this is not just one or two polls. The average of polls in New York only have Biden up by 8 points. He won the state by 22 points in 2020. So Biden is hoping that this conviction is going to help shore up some support from people who might hate Trump more than him in order to push him over the finish line. But back to what I was saying earlier, I don't think Trump is going to spend a day in jail because the sentencing guidelines are just not going to show that. And as bad as Judge Merchant was, Merchant could have thrown Trump in jail for violating the gag order. And Merchant actually said, I really don't want to put you in prison. You could be president of the United States in a few months.
Right. So you think that
So,
this judge who's presiding over this case is too conscious of Trump's status as a political figure?
yes, I think
Okay.
that's exactly the case. I think what's going to happen is he's going to definitely make Trump pay a fine. And I think Trump is going to get somewhat of like a modified probation where he's technically on probation, but he'll have traveling privilege for campaigning and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But I don't see him actually sentencing Trump to a jail cell because I think as we were talking about it off the air, there is an element to the Democrat Party who thinks they've gone too far.
Right.
And putting Trump in a jail cell is just going to make his base even more rabid to vote for him than they already are.
And we're already seeing that. I think Steven Crowder has dropped his statement. I think I was looking up at another source, and it says that Trump's support has like quadrupled or something like that. That what do you call it? Trump support.
His
Oh
fundraising
yeah,
is through the roof.
the site where his campaign site has crashed because so many people have donated. This other guy came out and said he was donating like $300,000. As you mentioned earlier, one of you mentioned earlier, Andrew Tate was donating. Like everyone
Mhm.
is coming together behind Trump. So I think it's very obvious to America, even to liberals who hate Trump, who are totally plugged into the matrix, that this appears as a Democrat coup. What are your thoughts on that, Mike?
Mhm. I would agree with that. And like the one thing I want to stress the most is this is not going to move the polling numbers in Biden's direction.
Hmm.
I think I think Biden may have a very small temporary increase of support, but it's not going to be enough to take the lead in the key swing states. Most voters in the swing state and in the national polls have said that this specific case about the falsifying business records was the case they cared the least about.
Exactly. Exactly.
Now, if this was a conviction on Jack Smith's January 6th election subversion case, that would be a lot more deadly to Trump's chances.
That was the one that was more potent because it was the one that liberals actually cared about. Like liberals actually were some people were really truly convinced about American democracy ending because of January 6th. But this is one of the ones like no one Kennedy slept with Marilyn Monroe as an example. No one cares that there's hypothetically some sort of cover up because Trump slept with Stormy. Like people, the American people don't get it, don't care about that. Like it's something
Yeah.
that powerful men do. It's something that powerful men have always done. It's not really a scandal. So
Well,
this
no,
is
no.
like,
Look at
go ahead.
oh, sorry. Well, look at like the whole Bill Clinton thing. Bill Clinton, he was found guilty of sleeping with Monica Lewinsky, and nobody gave a shit about that.
Hmm.
He was impeached,
Well,
though.
the issue with the Bill Clinton thing, the special counsel fucked that investigation up.
Okay.
They tried to illegally detain Monica to try to get her to trap the president on a phone call. For Clinton at the time on a phone call that would prove a quid pro quo that he got her a job in exchange for her silence, and she did not talk. And as a result of that, the only thing they could get Clinton on was Clinton on lying about how we understood the definition of sexual conduct as the grand jury described it as.
Hmm.
But back in the case of Trump, I mean, one thing I'd like to point out is that 4 years ago, former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg ran for president. And on the debate stage, it was exposed that this guy had 5, 6, 7 non-disclosure agreements with a bunch of women. Why wasn't he investigated for how he paid these non-disclosure agreements? I mean, do you really think Michael Bloomberg wrote in his financial statements or his business's financial statements, I paid a non-disclosure agreement? Or do you think he probably classified it as a legal expense like Trump did in his case? Because technically, from an accounting point of view, a non-disclosure agreement is a legal expense.
Hmm.
If it's negotiated through a lawyer, technically it can count as a legal expense. I say the biggest stretch with Trump's trial was they were trying to stretch it into a felony by saying that Trump falsified business records in order to influence the 2016 election. So they were trying to argue that Trump had to report this under campaign finance laws, but he didn't use campaign money to do a non-disclosure agreement. He used his own company's money.
Mm.
So as a result of this trial, Red, they're going to have to rewrite campaign law because if if I buy myself a suit with my own money, if I decide to run for office to make myself look good in front of the voters, a prosecutor could go to me and say that's a campaign expense that you didn't report, even though I used my own money for it.
Exactly. That's kind of what I was thinking because we're like it's so hair splitting too that no one would even honestly care except for people who like, the only reason people care is because people hate Trump. Like it's just basically people arguing trying to get him on what a specific expense was categorized as. It's so contrived. It's so clearly contrived.
Yeah, and beyond that, he didn't even use campaign funds to do this. I mean, if he used campaign funds, then you could have actually had a legitimate felony there. He used his own money to do it, and they're trying to say you used your own money, but because they try to say you're trying to influence the 2016 election, you have to report it as a campaign expense. How can you report something
Do you remember how this one turned
an
out?
expense if you didn't use campaign funds for it?
I know, right?
I mean,
I think
just
we
the
should consider I think we should still entertain the real possibility that this could be something more serious. I understand that the media is I also respect your position. I think it's very plausible. That this is purely about damaging his reputation in the most high profile and unambiguous way. I think that's a legitimate possibility. I'm not on a side here. I just want to be prepared, so I'm considering all options. But I also am entertaining the possibility that they're actually trying to put him in prison. What I see is that the jury took like 2 days to deliberate or something like that. Like it is so clear to me that and I guess it's sort of a difference between your evaluation and my evaluation is how much how much power the judge in this case feels that he has, because on paper theoretically he could put Trump away for a very long time, but what you're estimating is basically that the system, the powers that be, are not invested, are not confident enough to actually throw the book at Trump, which I think we could both agree, theoretically, legally, they could do.
Yeah.
I think that I sort of see this as like maybe the judge, maybe your case is right, and I hope it's right. And the media seems to agree with you because that's how this is being framed, that Trump will not actually experience any jail time for this. But then on the other hand, theoretically, for each of these charges, he could go to jail for a very long time. Like I feel like there's a real precipice here. And if we're underestimating the power of the left, the power of the managerial state, the power of these forces that want to destroy America, this could be the beginning of their plan to get rid of Trump to then seize control of the American government and then immediately bring us into war with Russia and China. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I agree that there's two ways you can look at this, and there's two ways where this whole thing could go. I mean, I do think that there's definitely some people on the left who would love to throw Trump in jail for a very long time. But when it comes to my analysis of this case, the first thing I will say is that one, due to Trump's age and due to his record of having no criminal past,
Right.
he's not even if they would sentence him to jail, he would get he would get 4 years, which would not be good for the campaign, obviously. But you have to remember, New York has concurrent sentencing. They don't do consecutive sentencing if it's your first offense.
Okay.
On top of that, I really do think that the main purpose of this case was to try to wound his campaign rather than to put him in jail, because I do think that there is a group in the Democratic Party who realizes that putting Trump in jail would be like the most accelerant position they could take,
I completely
and
agree.
that it could spectacularly backfire on them. And
I
then
completely.
finally, like based on, and as I say, you could be right, I could be wrong. I'm just going based on how I've observed the judge's actions during the trial.
Yeah.
Based on his comments and his actions, I don't see him giving Trump a serious sentence. But what you did say is troubling, because even if it's not the people who are in charge of this outcome, there are people who would love to see Trump get thrown away so they could force like a election between Joe Biden and controlled opposition on the Republican side, like Nikki Haley or someone like that,
Yeah.
where they're going to get their war with Russia and China no matter who wins.
Yeah. That's the other issue is Congress, the House and the Senate passed this law recently. I think that was made it so that Trump could not withdraw from NATO even if he wanted to. I mean, he said he's wanted to, but you know what I mean. Like it's now he can't make that unilateral decision that America is withdrawing from NATO. So at least in terms of like the structure and mechanics of government, it definitely seems that the managerial state, as I call it, is gearing up for war with Russia and China. And we've already seen figures like Klaus Schwab talk about how in the near future, America or the Western world, Western Europe, whatever, is going to have to prepare for all these crises, uh, mass blackouts and other pandemics and people are going to have to like food rationing, whatever. So in a sense, I can see how this could be the turning point where the Western world accelerates into this sort of horrible bureaucratic dictatorship. Although you do make some very strong points about how the actual ramifications and consequences of doing this on the part of the deep state and the Democratic Party and the managerial state generally would be very costly. It's not something that they could just do. And the media also seems to be on your side. Like if we have any understanding of media and how they foment narratives, it seems like they're priming us for this is going to be another slap on the wrist, but this is the biggest slap on the wrist because he actually got convicted, if you know what I mean. So, like, if we were playing a game of chicken, if we're to take the sort of media response and interpret it through the lens of what I just said, that that's their position, then they've already pulled out. Like, the worst damage they're going to do is just this is the maximal damage to his reputation. Because, and I do take this as a credible criticism, if they're going whole hog, if the deep state and the Democratic Party and whatever you want to call it, the managerial state, et cetera, were actually serious about throwing him in prison over this, then that would be a significant departure from their usual modus operandi. Because their style
Mhm.
is more to do like ballot harvesting, if you know what I mean. They're more covert. They like to they feel comfortable when they have more plausible deniability. This, on the other hand, it feels like it's just crossing too many lines. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I could agree with basically everything you just said because my biggest point I'm going to say right now is if they were going to incarcerate him, they could have easily revoked his bail today and remanded him into custody.
Okay.
That's what I was telling you earlier. They let him leave to go to Barron's graduation in Florida and pause the trial. Remember?
Yeah,
Right.
that's my girlfriend pitching in. She's saying that
Like
she agrees with you
usually,
because they let him go to Barron's graduation.
yeah, usually if somebody is found guilty of a crime, they usually remand into custody and suspend bail right that second.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that he's not doing any time in the pre-sentencing period shows that I really think it's just going to be the damage they're going to do is try to just have the label convicted felon and just repeat that from now until November because as you said they act a lot more subtle than doing things right out in the open like throwing him in jail.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily think it's going to work just because as we talked about earlier this specific charge is not a charge that the voters are very concerned about.
Correct. Do you think America is at the point where even if Trump were in jail and were hypothetically running his campaign while he's in jail, that he would still win over Biden? Over Biden?
Oh
I'm
yeah,
a yes on
I
this.
think Trump could win from a jail cell.
Me too.
I,
Me too.
I wouldn't say it's definite, but I'd still say it's very possible. There's a possibility. There's a path. I'm not going to say that it's a definite slam dunk that he would, but it's not impossible that he would.
I would agree. I would vote. I would vote Trump even harder
I
if
don't
that
know.
were
I feel like that's kind of like Idiocracy, the movie, if we have a president that's literally in jail.
he's a felon. I would. Well,
Like
this
if
is
he's actually in fucking jail,
yeah.
like for the entire presidency type of
Well,
thing.
no.
Like
Well,
like
no,
you
no,
have
no.
to
No,
have
no. If
If
he
he
got
gets
elected, they would
imprisoned,
have to let him out.
Mm,
yeah. Well, or it would trigger some sort of constitutional crisis, because another possibility, although I don't think it's likely, is that the verdict is held off until after the election, and then suddenly he's found guilty because this is a state court, not a federal court. I don't think this is likely, but theoretically, he could be determined to be guilty and required to go to jail. I think that would trigger a constitutional crisis, but hold
my
on.
uncle who's a felon can't vote. So how can someone who's a convicted felon run for president if you lose the right to vote?
There are different rules in different states. Because New York is a state where
Well,
felons can vote, so long as they're not behind bars.
I
well,
was gonna say
Red.
my
The
uncle
other
straight up
important
can't.
thing
He lost his right to vote.
I'd like to answer the question with this. The thing is the guidelines on who can and can't run for president is set by the Constitution, the federal Constitution, not state law.
Right.
And in order for Trump to be barred from running for president, they would need to pass a constitutional amendment saying that a president can't be a felon. Right now, there's nothing in the Constitution that says a felon can't run for president because I quite honestly think the founding fathers did not anticipate a felon would try to run.
Exactly. And yeah, I don't think that him having a felony would prevent him from doing so. I think the issue would be more if he is literally
States doing that is totally fucked. Then.
stop. If he is literally physically in jail, then I think that might hamper his ability. Not so much that like
The optics.
exactly the optics. Like it could be demoralizing to people if we have a person who is, and again this also depends on whether or not he receives his sentence before or after the conviction the what do you call it? The convention, the
Convention.
Republic yeah, the
It'll be
Republican Party
before.
convention.
It's going to be his sentence is going to be 3 days before the convention.
Oh, okay.
Says it's July 11th.
It's so we're finally learning the sentence July 11th.
Yep.
So
And
we
I
have
think he
like
gets formally nominated on the 14th, 13th
okay.
or 14th.
So it's like the end. Well, it's the end of May now. So we have basically a month and
Right.
11 days, a month and a half, basically.
Kinda.
Kind of, like a month and 1/4. Before we actually find out what's going to happen.
And I'd like to add like one final topic to this conversation, if this is okay.
Certainly, certainly. Go on
And
and
this
state
this
all your
could be
thoughts if you feel like it.
because there's going to be an implication on how the debate goes because of this conviction.
Right.
Him and Biden are debating, I think, June 27th,
Hmm.
and Biden is going to like let's not set the bar too low for Biden. I'm sure they're not going to allow him to go on a debate stage unless they give him the right doses of Adderall or whatever they have
Yeah.
to keep him focused.
Biden's guidance is going to be tweaking on that debate stage.
But Biden is going to do line after line about Trump being a convicted felon.
Yeah.
I don't think Trump can afford to freewheel this debate. I think Trump has to
Prepare.
remain calm,
Oh yeah.
and he just has to keep the discussion on Biden has failed. Biden
That's
has failed. Biden has failed. If
That-
he lets Biden get under his skin and it turns out to be like the first 2020 debate, it's not necessarily going to look great in the immediate aftermath. So I think Trump has to have people just sit down and like he's gonna have to prepare himself. Like this is probably like a cruel way to prepare him, but he's gonna have to be in a room with people who are just gonna shit talk him for hours and hours on end. So when he gets up on that debate stage, he's not going to be as phased as he would if he didn't prepare for it.
That's right. I agree. I agree. I think also your angle makes sense too. This conviction could also be potentially added ammunition for Biden during this debate because Biden is senile, and if he can just remember for 3 seconds that what do you call it that Trump has been convicted, he could just harp on that. I'm also seeing I just saw some news right now from KansasCity.com. It says an opinion: Joe Biden should seek a pardon in Trump verdict and prevent disunity, martyrdom. Opinion. Yeah, the conviction is July 15th. The Trump is supposed to be sentenced 4 days before the GOP convention. From the Associated Press, the hush money case, though criticized by some legal experts who called it the weakest of the four prosecutions against Trump, takes on added importance not only because it proceeded to trial first, but also because it could be the only one of Trump's cases to reach a jury before the election. The other three, local and federal cases in Atlanta and Washington that he conspired to undo the 2020 election, as well as federal indictment in Florida charging him with illegally hoarding top secret records, are bogged down by delays or appeals. There is also always the chance that this could be appealed too. It would be unusual, but I think that's a realistic prospect. So, assuming that the Dems are actually going for the jugular, that they're not doing what Mike told us they're doing, that they're more serious. This is more than a mere smear. They're actually trying to throw him in the slammer. We could potentially have the Supreme Court intervening too. What do you think of that, Mikey?
I think definitely if he appeals, because like he doesn't just go to the appellate court, he can appeal all the way up to the Supreme Court when it comes to a criminal conviction, because you get to appeal multiple times until you hit the highest court in the land. I think if he was to go the appellate route, his best case is to argue that he did not receive a fair trial due to the vicinity where the trial was held. The trial was held, the jury pool was picked from an area that is 85% Democrat. If you spin a wheel 12 times and 85% of it is blue and only 15% of it is red, you can have multiple scenarios where you get all 12 in the blue category.
Hmm.
Not
Like the percentage is high enough to the point where you're not going to get an impartial jury.
Well, I heard we
So,
had a single based juror in this case who got their news from Truth Social and X. So I would imagine that,
from Twitter.
yeah. Uh, so I would imagine that even like given the pressure and the high profile nature of this case, I would imagine that what my point was, we heard there was one base juror. The system has obviously twisted and contorted itself in such a way that it's clear that they're like attempting to push this through, which is why I'm like, if they're going through all this rigmarole to make it happen, like it doesn't make sense to me that they're they could really go for they could feasibly go through the jugular if they're going through all this trouble. You see what I'm saying?
yes.
Yeah.
No, I agree that it's totally within their ability to go to the jugular. I'm just saying is, do you think that they will, or do you think that there's still a basic amount of people in the Democratic Party who might want to be subtle and play it safe by just trying to use this as a smear when the ballot box happens, if that makes sense?
I have no idea. I literally have like it could be 50-50. Um my mentality, I usually assume the worst. I'm a pessimist in that sense. So I would go with the the worst case scenario in this instance, but I also feel that you've made a very strong and compelling case that this is more about smear, and especially because with these sorts of things we do see the media is acting as like a sort of official arm, if you will,
Hmm.
of the interests of the managerial state, of the interests of the deep state. And it would be we would be crossing a Rubicon in the sense that if I'm correct, then the media would be working their narrative, the narrative they're fomenting would be out of concert with what the actual mechanics of legal proceedings would lead to. And it's possible because, you know, even though they're politically our enemies, they're not necessarily perfectly organized, if you know what I mean. Like
Hmm.
even though they all hate Trump, they hate the right, et cetera, et cetera. Uh, the left hand may not know what the right hand is doing, if you know what I mean. And
Yes.
there might be some of them who had, as you perfectly pointed out, the goal of just smearing Trump, and then I'm sure as you've heard the old folks saying, the devil always takes you a little bit further than you want to go. There could be perhaps another element within the left that is actually serious about accelerating this country into like an apocalyptic
Hmm.
scenario, and they're not playing around. Uh,
Well, well,
and
kind of. Sorry,
go ahead.
gonna go off what you're saying with the whole apocalyptic thing. That's something I've heard a lot of people say that I think one of the inherent problems of the modern left is that it is inherently nihilistic.
Hmm.
You This idea of speeding towards an apocalyptic scenario, you could make the argument it's because these people on the left have gotten to a point where they just do not care about anything. They want
Mhm.
to see. They want to see everything burn.
Hmm.
They've lost faith.
Leftism is perhaps the most nihilistic philosophy that this world has ever seen. And additionally, we see all these sort of brash, bold, accelerationist policies on the European front, specifically as it pertains to the Ukraine. And with the Ukraine, Congress passed a law that would prevent Trump, even if he were hypothetically elected, from pulling out of NATO. And also, you have all these European countries pledging that they're either going to support Ukraine or send troops there. If I think Macron, it's really like France and Poland agitating for this, pledging soldiers under some sort of circumstance. I forget what it was specifically, but then other European countries saying they'd be fine if the Ukraine made missile strikes or began to strike into Russian territory. Because, as is a fact that's I don't feel is highlighted enough lately in these conversations about the special military operations in Ukraine. Ukraine has never actually struck the Russian heartland. They never struck Russian territory. So we are seeing, at least from that contingent of globalists, some very what feels like brinksmanship, very accelerationist, very concerning behavior. It's really throwing caution to the wind. That's part of what pushes me towards this could be a full acceleration where they're actually trying to throw him in prison, and this isn't about simply tarnishing Trump's reputation, because we could be on the precipice of a total transformation of governance, where basically they want to the managerial elite want to throw Trump in prison and gear up for war with Eurasia, gear up for war with Russia and China. And
Mm,
I acknowledge with this position, that's a lot to juggle, right?
Mm,
Because this is a level of warfare that has never been conducted on a modern scale. Like two modern states with drones and nuclear weapons, weapons, let alone the U.S. versus Russia or the U.S. versus Russia and China and all the allies, etc. That's never happened before, and that's a very we would have to have some very selfish and impulsive leadership to be willing to engage in a conflict like that. Like the issue
mhm.
is here again with this Trump thing, and like with this geopolitics thing. I can see the sort of we see our elite. Are they stupid enough to do this? Are they impulsive enough to do this? Are they overconfident enough to do this? I could see an argument for saying yes. And then on the other hand, I could see the argument for saying that, this is beyond the pale and this is a smaller scale thing and they're not actually putting all this is more they're more bark than they are bite. How are you guys feeling about this? I've been monologuing for a while.
Here's here's what I'm gonna say. You mind if I use probabilities very quickly? I'll make my prediction right now.
Go ahead as long as you want.
All right. I think that both of us have made great points on why or how that or what avenue this thing could go down. I'd say from a probability standpoint, I think there's a 65% chance that what I said happens where they just use it to tarnish his record. But there's also there's a 35% chance that they might go all the way. So it ain't nothing. 35% chance is pretty big. I don't know if you ever heard of the stories of played Russian roulette. 35% chance is a real chance. But I just think that based on the fact that the left itself is not completely organized and based on the fact that they've always moved more subtle, I am going to lean it slightly in my direction. I mean, 65% chance is the majority, but it's not an overwhelming majority, if that makes sense. There's
I
always
agree.
mm.
the option that it could go the other way.
I agree. I agree. Alex, how are you feeling about
So,
this? What are your thoughts?
I'm more in honestly more of like a Red's point of view, where I'm quite a pessimistic person.
Hmm.
I won't unrule Mikey's like 65% guess though, but I think just personally we should honestly be ready for the metaphorical shit hitting the fan. Our current leadership, whether it is incompetent or malicious, is proven to itself to be completely incapable of or not willing to do anything for the common man, and that is something that I think the right needs to step up its game on.
Hmm.
Hmm. That's also why I said in the earlier video, this very much feels like a it's so over moment and a we're so back moment at the same time. Like this could
Hmm.
literally go either way, and the entire country is on the edge of its seats right now. Oh
But
boy.
no, one of the things though that I've heard from a lot of center of the right, well, I do disagree with a lot of centrists. Like something that I do think that I completely agree with Mikey about putting pressure on the Republican Party. One of the inherent problems that I especially noticed with the whole neocon mentality is that on the right, I think our best strength is that we know what we don't like. We know exactly how to pick apart ideologically and logically why we don't like something. The problem is that the neocon attitude, which is a plague to the modern right, it doesn't motivate us to do anything. There's no plan to do with what information
Hmm.
that we have, and we do need to and I think as voting members, we do need to put pressure on our so-called representatives to actually put forth the change that is necessary to achieve our ideological goals.
I can't see a scenario where like the establishment right has to understand that we're never gonna back Nikki Haley. Like we don't want her. She has to be funded by the opposition. And we'd never go for something like that. So they have to understand that Trump is the only option. That they have to know how much is riding on this right now. And I
Well,
would
yeah,
hope
one of the things that even a lot of liberal sociologists will agree is what I think is a really interesting scenario is what one Obama is kind of we go back to the Obama presidency. Obama is kind of what you could consider the last of that old guard neocon neolib era.
yeah.
Really is the transitional period. I think with Trump, what even a lot of other liberal and notice Trump represents a new shift in a political paradigm. He represents a more populist and in a way almost distrustworthy of of establishment politics and the right.
Mhm.
That I don't think, like, let's say if you, I don't think that coming off of say the Bush presidency that Trump would have won the election. Only with the Obama administration of that transitional shift do I think a Trump victory in 2016 was possible, if that makes any sense.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Um,
Could I actually make a quick point here because I'm going to throw a little.
Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Yeah, sure.
I think if Trump ran as a Democrat in 2008, he could have won. If he like made his economic views a little bit more in favor of like pro universal health care, but still kept his immigration views and focused on the anti-war stuff, he
Hmm.
probably could have beat McCain, or he would have beat McCain. I mean, the other thing people have to keep in mind is like the radical shift in the Democratic Party happened in the last, I'd say, 12 years,
Hmm.
because in 2008, I mean, there were still blue dog Democrats in the South. I mean, Obama got 40% in West Virginia that year.
Hmm.
So I'd
And that
say
go ahead.
I'd say the real crazy lurch to the left, I would say, didn't happen until after post 2008.
I completely agree.
I agree that it wasn't until after the Obama election.
And
I
especially
mean,
because Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say Obama had the same position on gay marriage as Sarah Palin did in 2008. Just keep that in mind.
That's a fantastic point. That's a fantastic point. Uh, I was also gonna say like Trump is also literally a blue dog Democrat from the '80s. Like he's not some sort of. I mean, I love him. I think he's a. I think he's our this country's last shot at freedom. But like, he's not Mr. Far Right. He's not even Nixon, for Pete's sake. Like he's literally. If you took any blue dog Democrat from a time capsule from the 1980s out and brought him here today, they'd be Donald Trump. Like he's not some sort of ridiculous like he represents the and you can see this especially with rural America too, how we have this political shift going on. These people, these white people who worked in factories and stuff in rural America were felt left behind by Hillary, and fundamentally they are Union Dems, even though they're now voting red. And that's why we've seen this
Mhm.
massive upheaval in the Republican Party, why we've seen Romney displaced, why we've seen the sort of McCain neocon faction, Bush now being some sort of quote unquote mainstream figure appreciated by the left and normies and the media generally like clearly uh without going too far here, uh Trump represents the interests of a group of people who the system wants to destroy.
But no, I know it was a funny caveat, but just to like you said, like the people in the powers that be want these people, these former factory workers and those kind of people gone.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, because especially in rural areas, what these one of the which is it could be a downside or an upside depending on how you view it. Like living in a rural area, what that we've seen that the managerial class absolutely hates is the idea of being as self-sufficient as possible.
Mm,
Being in a rural area, you kind of are really forced to be self-sufficient in a sense, considering you are far away from any major resources. You are compelled by your environment to learn how to live as minimally as possible. Even if you may be a wealthy person in a rural area, you're taught
Mhm.
how to exist in an
in an
area where
area
you
where you
really don't
really don't
care
care
about
about
what's
what's
outside in the big area. And if there's one thing this
thing this
managerial
managerial
class
class
absolutely despises, it's self-sufficiency in any way.
you're really highlighting the values and skills of rural America and the importance of the connection to the land and the sort of transhumanism of the left in their intent on separating people from this.
Mhm.
Because I think one of the best examples I think that we can even look at in history is honestly Switzerland. If you look at the whole identity of the Swiss, it is in learning how to exist with your neighbors in a rough mountain environment. The whole Swiss identity is centered on how can we form these tight knit communities that may be isolated from each other, but within each community, there is a strong sense of familial bonds and high trust between them.
Mm. I was thinking about this the other day. Is there any way that we could actually return to like Jacksonian democracy? I don't think so, but like that was kind of the
I would
question.
doubt
I'm like,
so.
this is how Americans as a whole would like return to tradition. Like we wouldn't we have this like grotesque financialized economy, this attention economy, this gig economy. I'm like, our traditional experience of America is still largely agrarian. Like America was started as like most people were farmers. It start even though this was like post-industrial revolution, most people were still farmers. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I mean, the way I see it is it would have to be a massive economic shift that would return power back to rural Americans for that to happen.
Mm.
Right now, the funny thing is like we no longer have the country that Alex de Tocqueville described
Mm.
in his book about the American experience. Like most people are not as connected with their local representatives as they were back in that time. Everything is just so nationalized now, if that makes sense.
Well, no,
When people
even
don't,
that's well, kind of add to Mikey's point. Like even in big cities, what we're seeing is compared to decade even in decades past, cities have gotten hugely well populated with a diverse mix of cultures, but yet everybody's lonely. We're seeing a huge loneliness epidemic that people don't feel connected to even the community in which they were raised in.
Mm.
Even if we go back to the 80s, the that was extremely rare. That was expected that even if you went to university, it was expected that you would go home to wherever community you grew up in, and
Mhm.
then try to carve out some sort of existence for you there because you felt some sort of emotional attachment to this small community that you had growing up.
Yep. And even to add to your point, like way back in the time of Jacksonian democracy, they lived in a time where people consider themselves more loyal to their states than the federal government. Like
Mm.
people saw themselves as I'm a Virginian, I'm a New Jerseyan, a Carolinian before they used the term American, if that makes sense.
Mm. Mm.
So there would have to be a massive economic shift for that to happen. I don't know. Maybe if we win and get power, we can create something called the Good Reset instead of the Great
Mm.
Reset. But it's going to be a long time before there's just so much we have to address now. I just don't see it happening in our lifetimes.
Mm. I agree. Anyways, I this has been we're approaching an hour here, so I think I'll cut it short just because this will be a very long time for me to have to listen through and edit. But this has been Red Channels. That was Mikey and Alex, Jersey Mike, and Alex Chuddington. And I will catch you in the next one.